Hey everyone. So if you're watching this, you probably know me personally. I don't know how else you would have found this video. Um, but I'm hoping that maybe eventually this will make its way to some other people. I want to talk about sort of a difficult health experience I've been going through. I developed sort of a rare skin condition, which then led to a more serious diagnosis. Um, and I'll get into all of that. But in case anyone is dealing with a similar thing, I thought it would be useful to get my story out there. Because when I was looking stuff up about this, over the last month or so, I really couldn't find too much in the way of like personal stories, especially on YouTube. And I always find it helpful to hear other people's experiences and find other people to reach out to in times of difficulty. So if anyone's watching this and experiencing something similar, you can totally feel free to message me. Um, so if you don't know who I am, although I assume you do if you're watching this, my name is Michelle. I'm 26 and I am a grad student in math at the University of Minnesota. I've lived in Minnesota since 2012 when I came here for college, moved up to Minneapolis, took a couple years off of school and did some other stuff, and then started grad school in 2018. And before I moved to Minnesota, I grew up in Connecticut, Westport, Connecticut. And my childhood was very defined by being in the pool. So this relates to the condition that I'm going to describe in a second, but I would spend all day, like every day over the summer, in the pool. My family called me part fish. Everyone would tease me about how long I could be in the water and not get tired of it. And as I kind of got older and, was in middle and high school, I got really into springboard diving. So I spent like 3 to 5 days a week at practices for that all throughout high school. And I was just constantly in the water. And I loved it. And I still love being in the water. But about a year ago, so a little bit after the pandemic started, it was probably a month or two, I started noticing that when I was in the shower for a few minutes or washing my hands, like doing dishes, so when my hands were in water for like an extended period of time, but really not that long, just a few minutes, they would start to wrinkle up really, really badly. And of course, everyone's hands get kind of pruny in the water, but this was not that. I had kind of a childhood of being in the water, and I never experienced this extreme level of wrinkling then. If I had, I probably would have done a different sport because it's kind of uncomfortable. It's like a burning sensation. So to this day, I wear gloves in the shower and I wear gloves when washing dishes. I basically try to avoid prolonged contact between my hands and water at this point. As you can imagine, this has been kind of difficult for me because it's such a big part of who I am, like water sports and just being in the water. It feels like my happy place. And now having this condition just makes it feel a little bit less accessible or fun. And it's not the end of the world. It's a hobby. And for the rest of my life, or for the other parts of my life, this symptom is not particularly debilitating. I've found ways to just deal with it on a day-to-day basis. So for pretty much the entirety of 2020, because of everything else that was going on, with the pandemic, I had to adapt to online teaching, and I live in Minneapolis, and there was the uprising last summer after the murder of George Floyd. Lots of current events happening around that and the election, and just, there was so much happening last year that my particular health problems were not forefront in my mind. And also because of COVID, I wasn't really making a lot of doctor's appointments because I just didn't want to risk going to the doctor at that point. I kind of continued to ignore it through the fall also because I was very busy with school and COVID cases were kind of spiking in Minnesota in the fall, so I just didn't make doctor's appointments. But finally, after my fall semester, when we had a winter break, I started to make like a few appointments that I had been putting off because things felt a little bit safer at that point. And the main person that I wanted to see was a dermatologist about this condition because I had just been ignoring it for so long. So I saw her a few days into 2021, and I want to give her a shout out on this video. I doubt she'll ever see it, but if you happen to live in the Twin Cities and need to go to a dermatologist, I really liked her. Her name's Larissa Speetson. She works at the St. Paul Dermatology Clinic through Health Partners. And I just kind of randomly got paired with her, I guess. Like I just happened to call their clinic. And I had a video visit with her, and sent in some photos of my my hands after being in water for an extended period of time. Like after I got out of the shower, I tried to take some photos. So I sent her some pictures and she looked at them before I got in to the appointment, and she didn't really know what to think at first, but because she hadn't really seen this like much before, if at all, was my understanding. It's kind of a rare thing. But her initial guess was that there was some connection to cystic fibrosis. And I knew what cystic fibrosis was vaguely, but I didn't know of any family history of this on either side. And my mom has a pretty big family in particular, and like, you know, they've gotten various testing done at different points. Like I thought that something might have come up or would have come up that would have, alerted us to CF mutations or CF carriers in our family, but nothing had. So when she said that, I was like, well, maybe I'm a carrier, because tons of especially Caucasian people are walking around as carriers of CF and don't know it. But I didn't, have any reason to believe that. So I wasn't too concerned when she mentioned the cystic fibrosis link to begin with, especially because she didn't even really have a diagnosis for me about this condition yet. So I made a follow-up appointment with her a month later. And by that point, she had talked to like several of her colleagues. This was one of the reasons why I really liked her as a doctor. At my initial visit with her, she, didn't know exactly what it was, but she didn't definitively say like, it's this, without evidence or without like really knowing. But she also didn't say like, oh, this is harmless and you don't need to worry about it and it's just an inconvenience, but other than that, it's harmless. I feel like in visits with doctors in the past, different types of doctors, I've had certain situations where doctors will just kind of dismiss you and say that your concerns are unfounded or like due to anxiety or something like that. And other doctors where, they'll kind of definitively say, oh, it's this. And you're like not sure if that's conclusive or if that's just kind of their guess. But in Dr. Speetson's case, she was very interested in being thorough and following through with her colleagues and kind of treating this like a problem to be solved, which as a mathematician, I appreciated. So she ended up, a month later at my follow-up visit with her, she ended up diagnosing me with aquagenic keratoderma. And about 34 dermatologists had looked at my photos in the meantime, so everyone kind of weighed in, apparently, I guess on an email chain or something, which was funny to think about, that so many dermatologists had looked at my photos. But they diagnosed me with this thing, aquagenic keratoderma. People refer to it as aquagenic wrinkling of the palms. And she basically said, yeah, there's a strong link to cystic fibrosis, so you might need to, or you might want to get tested to see if you're a carrier. She did not And the other dermatologists did not really suspect that I would have some form of CF because it's pretty rare to be diagnosed as an adult. And I otherwise don't really have any other CF symptoms. I haven't had, pancreatic issues or issues with my lungs up to this point in my life, and I'm 26. I've been a pretty active person. It just, I haven't had frequent lung infections or anything like that. So this was just not on my radar at all, and not on really anyone's radar who was, dealing with me in this situation. They really didn't think that I would ultimately have some form of CF, but they thought it's pretty likely that you might be a carrier. And I started to do some more research into this. And this is like a rare enough condition that all the information about it online is pretty much in journal articles, like scientific journal articles. So it's pretty reputable. It's not like, I have a headache and I'm looking up possibilities for the headache and then I'm like concluding that I have brain cancer. I now had a very specific diagnosis and I had specific information, and I felt like I could do some good research with that information. You're always told not to go down internet rabbit holes, but I felt like at this point it was such an unusual situation and I know how to research. Like, I'm in a PhD program. So I felt like I could, probably learn some stuff online, and I didn't want to, give myself a bunch of anxiety, but I also wanted to be prepared for possible outcomes. So I did some research. I found that this skin wrinkling condition was very, very tied to CF, in the sense that it's like really unlikely that you have aquagenic wrinkling and aren't at least a carrier of CF or have some form of it. So this started to convince me that it was pretty likely there was a connection to CF. And I almost wanted to find out that I was a carrier just because I didn't want to have the disease, but I didn't want to have no connection to CF and then be completely in the dark as to what was causing this skin condition, because it was affecting my life and it was kind of a bummer, and it still is. And I didn't want to have zero answers about why this just suddenly appeared, because it kind of felt like my hands betrayed me in a sense. So I kind of waited around a couple more weeks after that, started to think about how to treat the skin condition. And then, somewhat coincidentally, my mom had happened to get genetic testing done for a completely different reason. That reason turned out okay, so that was good. But in the process, she found out that she was a carrier of the Delta F508 gene, which is one of the most common CF mutations. So she told me this, and my immediate reaction was like, okay, I'm glad I probably have an explanation for this hand thing. But then, a few seconds later, the sort of dread set in that, what if I'm not just a carrier? What if I actually have some form of CF? Because diagnosis of cystic fibrosis typically happens in childhood. It can happen in adulthood, but, it's more rare for that to happen. But now I had these sort of strong pieces of evidence that this wasn't out of the realm of possibility. There clearly were other carriers in my family. And in fact, actually, some other people looked at genetic testing they had done and kind of just had glossed over the CF gene because they didn't think there was any reason to look at it. So two of my mom's sisters looked at it, and I think at least one of them ended up being a carrier as well. So we clearly have some carriers, floating around in our large extended family. But none of them had this wrinkling symptom. And I felt like, okay, I have a symptom, so that maybe suggests that I might actually have some mild form of cystic fibrosis. Um, and when I say mild form, so I've been kind of doing a lot of research online and stuff, and I don't think that's like a technical term, mild form of CF. But, what I mean by that is I have CF, um, but it is a more mild version where, I wasn't diagnosed in childhood and I haven't had any symptoms up to this point. So I started to become concerned that I had some form of CF. And over the next few days, it became increasingly more difficult to kind of concentrate on school and just do anything because I was consumed by trying to research this, look up videos by CF people, podcasts, try to learn from other CF people, like people with CF, just to, have some information about the disease and different people's experiences with it, because everyone is completely different when it comes to this disease, or really any disease. Everyone's bodies are so different, but it is good to just at least like know some names of people in the community who you could potentially reach out to in case of a diagnosis and things like that. Or that's what I was thinking. So that's what I was doing for kind of the last month. And about a week after my mom told me she was a carrier, I went in for an initial test called a sweat test. So this was about a month ago. So I guess my mom found out she was a carrier like 5 weeks ago, and then the next week I got tested with this sweat test. And the sweat test tests for levels of chloride in your sweat. So typically people with CF have higher levels of chloride in their sweat. And I ended up getting kind of a borderline result. So my levels of chloride were elevated past what is normal, but it wasn't enough to definitively give me a diagnosis. So from there, they actually had to do genetic testing, take a blood sample and send it to a lab. And that whole process took about a month because they had to check with insurance, they had to do the tests, they had to do like a report, generate a report, and then do a clinician review. So the whole process took about a month. So as you can imagine, this past month has been a really just difficult, time of uncertainty for me, because I've just been stressed out and anxious, and I already run pretty anxious as a person in general. And I have been this year trying to study for my oral exam, which is a very anxiety-inducing time in a grad program. So I've just had a lot going on, and I'm, plus like all the sort of just stuff from last year that I feel like we all haven't collectively processed it, like just everything that's happened in the last year. I mean, it's so much. So it just feels like a lot of change, but I was very distracted from school. I really didn't get that much done in the last month, but I think it ultimately prepared me for today's news, which pretty much an hour ago, I got a call from the genetic counselor who I had met with at the time of my sweat test. So I talked to a genetic counselor kind of while I was getting the test done, told her family history and everything. And she, based on my family history, she didn't think it was super likely that I would have CF, but she, then coupled with the borderline sweat test results and everything, it seemed more like a possibility by the time I left the office that day. And so she called me today. She said she had gotten the report from the lab, and so I do have the DF508 mutation from my mom, and then there was a second mutation found, presumably from my dad. It's possible that both came from my mom. We're going to do family testing and everything, but Very, very likely that it's, one copy from my mom, one copy from my dad. And the mutation from my dad is a 5T12TG. That probably doesn't mean anything to most people watching this, but um, it's maybe a more, I don't want to use the terminology mild because it's not, everyone's outcomes are so different. But it seems that the combination of these two mutations, at least patients with these two mutations, don't seem to have much pancreatic insufficiency, which is good. However, it's still impossible to predict how my lung function might evolve. And so at the time I'm making this video, I've only known this news for about an hour or two, but I actually don't feel as terrible as I thought I would. Of course, I was still hoping to find out that I was a carrier, but being a math person, I know, or I knew, I knew how conditional probability worked. I knew the likelihood that I might have some form of CF was, you know, fairly likely, given all the evidence of my mom being a carrier, having this wrinkling symptom, and having a borderline sweat test. So I've really been taking the last month to process this and prepare myself for that possibility. And it's definitely weird. I don't like the idea that I still have a lot of uncertainty as to how my symptoms might develop, because it's not like a doctor can tell you your exact outcomes just by looking at your mutations. But I'm going to visit, a pulmonologist, a lung specialist, and, talk with them and maybe get some information about my current lung function. Yeah, all of this is very, very weird because, it's such a hard diagnosis to get regardless of who you are. And it affects people in different ways. I've been feeling lucky to have the resources that I do with the healthcare that I have through my university, and things like that. But, and I kind of feel like it's going to be okay because medical technology has been improving so much recently, and there's a recent medication that came out called Trikafta in 2019. It's basically like gene therapy, and it's been like monumental, life-changing for CF patients, it sounds like. So that's all good news. I mean, I think medical technology is just improving rapidly around CF and really everything. And so as I get older, it'll just get better. And I don't know when my symptoms might worsen. I mean, I don't really have any lung symptoms at the moment, but I don't know when I may or may not develop them. It's possible that I will never develop them, but I have developed this skin condition already, so I don't know. Yeah, so I'm kind of just taking that in. I think I'm going to be okay, and I feel, like I said, I feel very lucky and blessed in a number of ways to be in the position I'm in, and to have not had symptoms growing up, although it is kind of a weird thing to take in as an adult. Thankfully, I've kind of listened to enough podcasts by now that I have at least one person in mind to reach out to who got a late diagnosis. And I'm hoping to find more people like that because, yeah, it would probably be easier to relate to people with a later diagnosis just because it's a different thing than to like grow up with it and like that's all you know, and then you continue into adulthood versus growing up healthy and then finding out you have sort of a chronic illness. But again, I have this chronic illness, but I don't currently feel chronically ill. So it feels like a weird, just a weird juxtaposition of things. but I'm trying not to overthink it too much. And the one thing that was sort of reassuring today was that the genetic counselor said, because I said, how much is this going to impact my life, like immediately, like, in the here and now? Am I going to have to change my routine? And am I going to suddenly have to take a bunch of medications? And she said, the pulmonologist will tell you more, but it really is kind of about addressing your current symptoms. And because you are currently healthy, it's not going to be like all of a sudden your routine is completely different, but I'm still anticipating some changes. And it's good that I've kind of had the last month to learn and be prepared for this. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know. I mean, it's just hard because, I do feel blessed in a number of ways, as I've said a few times at this point. But the skin condition, already impacted this major part of my life, which is my love of swimming and water sports. And it's not that I can't still do those things, but it's just a little bit harder. And that's hard. And then the possibility that I might develop lung symptoms, I'm a singer, and that's like the other major outlet that I feel like I have in my life and have always had. And so this diagnosis kind of feels like it challenges certain aspects of myself, and that's hard to grapple with. But I don't know. At the beginning of all of this, I kind of thought that my hands had betrayed me by suddenly developing this symptom and being like essentially allergic to water. But now I kind of feel like they saved me in a sense, or like the water saved me, because I was able to find out about this diagnosis as a result of this condition. And I've heard of other stories where people have suddenly had really bad pancreatitis or really bad lung, infections, and or not necessarily even suddenly, like over the course of years, as adults, maybe they develop like lung infections, and don't really know what's going on, and no one suspects CF because it's typically diagnosed in childhood. So I am grateful to know about this in case that happens. So yeah, we will see. I can't predict the future. At the moment, I just want to kind of focus on finishing my semester and still making progress on studying for my oral exam and everything. It's just kind of hard to strike a balance between letting yourself have time to process and not letting it completely bulldoze your life. So yeah, that's kind of what I'll be trying to do for the next couple months. And yeah, that's this video. If anyone happens to find this who doesn't know me personally and instead found this because of the condition, like the aquagenic wrinkling thing or a late CF diagnosis, you can feel free to reach out. I'll maybe put my information in the whatever description of this video. You can tell I've never made a YouTube video, and I'm not even going to edit this because I don't feel like it. I usually just use this channel for music covers, but I don't know. In quarantine boredness, I've watched a lot of random YouTube videos, so I guess I have it on the brain, and I thought it would be a good thing to do. Yeah, so that's kind of my life right now, and maybe I'll post an update at some point if something significant happens, but at the moment, just kind of trying to, find out a little bit more about my current health, my current lung function, and take necessary precautions, but ultimately continue on with my life and continue doing what I'm doing and, be a mathematician, and whatever else I like to do. Hopefully, still a singer as well. So, yeah. Thanks for watching this.